Hello, and welcome to Coffee Time. Coffee Time is a space where magical humans come together for some real talk, strong coffee, and powerful introspections on whatever is top of mind right now. My name is Natalie, and I am your host for this channel and today's super exciting conversation. The idea behind Coffee Time is that you are in your favorite coffee shop, maybe cozied up with a book, and you begin to listen in on an intriguing conversation between folks at the next table over. For that reason, there is no big introduction. We absolutely let the conversation speak for itself. And if you do want to know more about these special guests following today's episode, I invite you to check out the show notes for more details. So, on that note, let's dive right in.
Hello.
Yay, it's working. How are
Okay,
you?
good. And you can hear me well because my audio sometimes a little off.
Yeah, it took time, but I can hear you. Can you hear me okay? Oh,
Okay. Yeah. Let me see if I can get my camera to stay.
there you go.
Okay.
Perfect. Yay. I'm excited. How are things going? I know we've messaged a bit, but it's always kind of cool to meet face to face for the first time.
I know. Things are a little crazy. Where are you located?
I'm outside of Vancouver in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew you were in Canada. I wasn't exactly sure where, but so here in the States, COVID is just crazy. And I'm in New York, which is actually better now than some other places because I think New Yorkers just like remember how bad it was.
Mhm.
But still, it's been a little crazy this last week with the cases. So that's my worry. And I'm traveling next week, which I wouldn't be doing except it's like to see a very sick family member. So it's like we've been waiting and waiting for COVID to get better, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to. So it's kind of now or never.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's been happening over here.
Yeah, I know here the cases have gone up and we're technically on lockdown right now, but like they haven't closed any stores. So there's a whole bunch of memes going around like locally that are like, tell us we're on lockdown, but all the malls are open. Like biggest mixed signals ever. Like, what are we supposed to do? So I'm kind of taking it like I have been for obvious reasons extra cautious the whole time because like if I don't need to, it's not worth it. And I've just been terrified at other moments. I relaxed a bit because they implemented more like overall precautions for people, right? But I'm kind of taking this lockdown as a reminder to kind of get back to how I was, but like less terrified. So I think it was like yesterday. This sounds so stupid, but I really wanted chocolate. And like for the past while, if I wanted it, I would have just walked and got it at the grocery store. But I was like,
Yeah.
you know what? It's not needed. I have enough food. Like I can order it with my groceries that I pick up by my car on Thursday. Like I don't need to add that risk to my life right now. So yeah.
And are you worried about getting it for yourself because of the diabetes mostly?
Yeah, it's just to me, it's that. And it's like, the way I see it is like everyone should really be approaching it. Like, if it's not necessary to leave your house, don't, because then people like us don't have to be terrified to go to the store who don't have another means of getting necessities, right? And people seem to think, well, I'm fine. I can go and every step of the way I'm just like, but it's not about you. And yeah, for me, it's like if I can take the extra precaution, I may as well. And I don't see many people, but like I still am going out. So the more I do that, the more I put myself and others at risk. And it's just like, you know what? Just stay home, decorate your Christmas tree, relax, like you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what my whole thing with traveling is. I'm so worried, but I had COVID, so I'm hoping that I hopefully I don't get it again, but I had it very, very light. So even if I do, hopefully it's the same, but I'm more worried that I get it and pass it along
Yeah.
without knowing at this point. In the beginning, I was really worried about getting it. And was extra, extra cautious. I mean, I think I'm cautious now, but I was just like limiting my outdoor exposure.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, just significant, like not going anywhere inside a building. I was walking outside every day, but that's it, especially because the city is, even when there are no tourists, it's much less crowded, but it's still crowded.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
for the first 3 months, was only leaving my condo once a week and I would take out the garbage and walk around the block. And I was like petrified. And I live in an area where I can go for a walk and run into two people. But I was just so scared because like there wasn't a lot of clear information, and being alone and everything. It's just like, I can't risk it. And I'd had a family member at the very beginning have a health issue. Like the first weekend we were told the border was closing, stay home, et cetera. They were in the hospital getting a quadruple bypass. So I was like, between that and my health issues and like my mom's health, it was just like, you know what? I don't want to be the reason that they have increased risk. If they want to do that for themselves, go for it. But like,
Yeah.
I'll just live with my cat. But I'm glad that for you, it wasn't how it could be, especially for people like us. Cause I think that's a big concern, right? When you're immunocompromised, is even a cold can just be amplified. And like, I know for myself, when I've gotten sick, as soon as, and this is like, well, maybe not TMI because we're talking health stuff, but as soon as I like throw up, I pretty much end up in the hospital because I'll go into like ketoacidosis and like need an IV. And I'm just like, whatever I can do to avoid that, because the hospital is not a safe place. And like, yeah.
Yeah, that was my biggest worry. Not that COVID would get me so sick that I need, to go on a machine or anything like that, but that I would go into DKA just because when I'm sick, my sugars go crazy. And that I would end up in the hospital, and hospitals here were really bad. So I don't even know when I got it. Honestly, I think it was at the very beginning because we were so, I commuted in a packed subway until they told me to stop. So, after that, I hardly, for like the first, just like you, for the first 3 months, I was very, very cautious. Not that I'm not now, but I do go, like I will go into a store and stuff like that. In the beginning, I was trying to get things shipped to me a little more.
I wasn't going into stores at all. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's crazy, because we just have all these additional layers to worry about. And I'm glad I was fine, but I've heard different stories from, different type 1s, and it seems like we're all over the place as well. Some people get it worse, some people's sugars really suffer, and others are just have like a little cold. So that was me, which thankfully, but you never know.
Yeah, I have definitely like both ends of the spectrum worry that you described. Like the one is like, I get this and I die. I also have MS, and they say that it doesn't make it worse, but it's like, to me, anything that compromises your immune system is probably not helping you in this situation. So like, so there's that end. And then there's also the part where it's like, well, so many of the symptoms are things I experience fairly frequently, but in like lesser degrees. So like, watch me get it, not know, and then I infect a bunch of people. So that's where it's like, yeah, just stay home unless it's necessary to go out. Yeah. Yeah. So is the transportation open there now or not so much? Yeah.
Yeah, it never closed down. And I didn't take the subway until June.
Okay.
So from March till June, I was just, wherever I could get to walking, or like I had a doctor's appointment that I cabbed to, but it never closed down because, people here don't have cars. So like I could walk like 5 miles, but I can't get downtown. So I have been taking it when needed. And, there's a lot of restrictions, like you're supposed to always wear a face mask, but of course there's always that one person that doesn't. So, just a lot of precautions, a lot of hand sanitizer, and getting like good masks to wear.
Totally. Yeah. About the same here. I mean, I was fortunate. I got a car in June. So that's also where I started to kind of loosen up a bit, because I had a safer way to get myself to places. Cause before, like here, it's a town outside the city. So like the sidewalks are the typical, like really narrow sidewalks. Like if you run into someone and there's like a construction zone beside you, like you can't keep 6 feet. So everything felt like kind of like a heightened, like fear around it, I guess. So at least with the car, like I have control over my transportation, which is nice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just, my family asked me, why don't you just buy a car or like lease a car from now? But I just think in New York City, it's not really as doable because we don't have parking readily available.
That's going to cost so much too. Like, yeah. I remember when I worked in Vancouver and you look at it's like some places for parking is like $30 a day. Like to me, that is just not possible. So
yeah,
no,
exactly.
Totally. So with like being diabetic, I know we had messaged a bit back and forth, but I feel like you were diagnosed a bit later, relatively speaking, as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I was diagnosed right after I turned 19. So I was in my first year of college. And at that time, I don't think they call it this anymore because, that was almost 15 years ago, but they called it late onset type 1.
Yeah.
Since then, I feel like I keep hearing more and more stories of people being diagnosed like in their 30s or later. And that's why I've also seen that it's changing from being called juvenile diabetes to type 1 a lot more. I don't know if I read that before there were cases where it was misdiagnosed. Like if you were over a certain age, they just assumed you were type 2, but already needed insulin. This is a long time ago and then there seems to also just be an uptick. Who knows why, but yeah, so I was one, and you can look at it both ways, like glass half full, glass half empty. Like I try to be positive and think I'm so lucky that like at 6, when I went to birthday parties, nobody stopped me from like shoving sweets in my mouth if I wanted to. And I think that when I look at young kids that are diabetic, that's the hardest, like for, little kids to understand why you have to count carbs and how to count carbs. Like, how do you guess how much sugar is in a muffin and versus a cupcake with lots of icing, etc. So, I try to think about it. Like I was really lucky. I got to do all that. And I was diagnosed at a time when I could take care of myself and I really understood it. So nobody had to administer anything for me. I think I do really poorly with that. I'm definitely more of a control freak. So I like to have control.
I was diagnosed. I was, how old was I? I think I was 20 going on 21, if I'm not mistaken. So I was in like 3rd or 4th year university. So around the same time it was exams, and I had that come up, and I'm glad you kind of touch on that because I think there's a misconception on both ends. And unfortunately like most health things, but it's perpetuated by a lot of the information that gets spread. Like even I see online, like, what is it, JDRF or whatever, the juvenile diabetes, blah, blah, blah. And there's a problem right there, juvenile. And it's like, well, type 1, it's common, I found out, for type 1 to be diagnosed up until age 30. And I think, like you alluded to, it can happen after that. And I tell people all the time, it's like, similarly, you can actually have a baby diagnosed with type 2 and it is purely genetic. So I think it's like important to have conversations like you and I are having today, because it helps kind of break that down and open up awareness a little. Like, I don't know if you experience this, but for me, being diagnosed at that age, like I had people commenting like, oh, so do you need to eat better? Like you did this to yourself and that kind of thing. And even if it had been because of that, like those comments are highly inappropriate. But like, that's just not what you need when you are dealing with this thing that now impacts every moment of your life for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I think it has helped me be able to phrase my questions to others when they have something that I don't understand, because just thinking about the way that you say things, like one of the top questions that I get is, oh, is that the bad type? Oh. And first of all, there is no good type.
What does that mean? Like,
yeah. And what they mean, I've learned, is, do you have to give yourself shots? And so then I have to go into this whole explanation that basically both, you could be a type 2 and need insulin, but yes, as a type 1, I don't make my own insulin. And then
I never will again. Like, yeah.
Right. And that's what a lot of people see as the bad type, because it's irreversible. And now again, there's a lot of differences between type 1 and type 2, and there's pros and cons. It is what it is. It's not the bad type and the good type.
Well, and it's exactly that. Like, there's so many reasons that it happens. I don't think for either that it's necessarily ever like this is the exact cause and this is the exact outcome. Like, there's a multitude of factors, including just where we live, and not even linked to like the types of food we consume. Like, just environment can have such a big impact. And so I think it's like what information is valuable to look at that's like supportive to moving forward, because like it can't change. And like I'm also, like, a couple other things in my life, like I'm also sober and I have MS, and like those are the questions people come with all the time, is like, oh, do you think it's genetic? Or like I had someone actually, when I was like newly sober with the MS thing, be like, do you think your drinking caused it? And it's like, well, even if that's not changing where I'm at now, that's not helping me do better for myself. So like, unless that serves me in some way, I don't see the point going down that road. And similar with diabetes, like I could look at I could look at food because like there potentially is some link between the food I ate growing up with. And for me, I wouldn't say sugar necessarily. I'd say probably pro-inflammatory foods, like
Yeah.
more broadly. And so now I can make a change to not eat those, but like dwelling on it or blaming people, like it's just not supportive. And it can make it really daunting, I think.
Yeah. And, you know, I do feel bad because I think there's such a stigma with, so once they learn that I'm type 1 and that it's the bad type, um, and then it's like, oh, but you didn't do it to yourself. And, you know, there's such a stigma with both type 1 and type 2, but I get also the question a lot of like, or not the question, the statement like, oh, but you're not, did you lose a lot of weight because you're not overweight? You know, because they assume that a diabetic at my age must be a type 2 and therefore must be overweight. So there's just, and again, I think, you know, I try to remember that most people are curious and it's coming from a good place. So it's just kind of like helping reframe
Mhm.
the way that they're saying things. And most of the time I'm pretty good about that. Sometimes I've just like had a day and I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a rude question.
And you know what though?
um,
I think it's okay to say that. Like normally what I'll do is like if someone says something, well, first they'll get a look from me, like especially if it's someone I'm close to, because it's like, really? And they'll be like, oh, is that like whatever? And I'll just ask them, like, do you really want to know this? Because I'm happy to tell you. Like I
yeah,
can give you this information. And so that's where normally I'll explain like what we just talked about, which is like type 1 up until age 30-ish. Like it can vary, but that's the common thing. No longer would I really call it juvenile because of that. And that can actually lead to some really, I think, harmful assumptions to people like us who are diagnosed later. And like I have felt excluded from that community because of it. So I felt like because I wasn't diagnosed young, I didn't have access to these resources. And like that's also highly
yeah,
problematic. So voicing there's many factors that contribute. And then also clarifying on the type 2 side, because I had those judgments at first too, because that's all I knew. Like, you know what you Google, right? And so clarifying, like, it's not always because people didn't eat well or because they're overweight. It can be all these things at any age. Um, and in a way, there's like more types than 1 and 2, because there's those nuances that come with it. And the main way that I've explained it, I don't know if this resonates for you, but is saying like, in my case, like my pancreas has like fully given up, like will never work again. Whereas for majority of type 2s, depending where they're at in the process and you know the other stuff, there's is like hibernating. It's like, dude, you made me work so hard. Like I'm just gonna take a nap. You figure your shit out, and like I'll come back later. And that's kind of the difference. Like mine is not waking up. There's like in most circumstances maybe could. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And you know, I mean, right. And it's funny that we, and I wonder how the type 2 community, like if they have to learn about a lot about it too, because I feel like you know, we have to give people the information all the time. But yeah, I explain it in a similar way. And then, you know, I go on to that's why if you're type 2, you could take like some oral medication and that would make the insulin start being produced again or, you know, being used in the right ways. Um, and yeah, I usually start with saying, you know, that's misinformation if somebody gives me a fact that's incorrect, and then kind of go into explaining. I have to say my friends, my good friends are very good about it. They know a lot about it, but this usually happens with like a friend of the family that you want to be nice and you know they're coming from a good place, but you're also like,
I don't think I'm that patient. That's funny. So do you mind me asking like what kind of, because people ask me this all the time, so I'll probably share too. We can go back and forth, but like what was your experience that led up to your diagnosis?
yeah. So I didn't know any of the symptoms. And I think that that's one thing that, you know, that's why I've been so open about my diagnosis story whenever anybody asks, because we didn't go to the hospital until I was really, really sick. So I was diagnosed in the emergency room, like a lot of type 1s are. No one in my family is a type 1. So I think, you know, I had like a great aunt that was a type 2, but so nobody really knew what symptoms to look out for. Um, and I had for like a few weeks, I had started feeling really dizzy um, at random points, usually like at random points in the day. I guess thinking back, it was like after I ate usually.
Mm,
Um, and I get dizzy now when my sugar's high,
okay.
but I'm guessing that's like when my pancreas was shutting down. But I was really active, so it would come and go kind of. That was my first symptom that I didn't even pay attention to. I thought I was just exhausted, like it was, my first year in college, I thought I was tired and
Which
didn't
you
even tell
probably
anybody.
were. Yep.
Yeah. And then I had a cavity that turned into needing a root canal, and my tooth was really hurting. And apparently I had a massive infection. So the doctor gave me these, put me on a week of antibiotics and gave me strong painkillers. And this all goes into my diagnosis story. So this is probably like 10 days before I ended up in the hospital. After that, I started feeling the typical symptoms that I know now are typical, but I didn't know then. I was really, really thirsty, so tired all the time. Like I just couldn't stay awake. I was running to the bathroom every 30 minutes, like clockwork.
Yep.
And I thought because I had this, I was on antibiotics and painkillers. So I thought that's what's making me thirsty, like new medication. Maybe I have dry mouth or something. Because of that, I'm drinking so much water. And I'm tired because it's like the end of the semester. I just made up reasons as to why all of these would be explained.
We have some parallels. Yeah.
And, again, I guess like these symptoms isolated, just like being really thirsty might not be a huge symptom. But then the last like 5 days, I kept having this blurry vision, and it was like just slightly blurry. The day I ended up at the hospital, it had been getting progressively worse every day. And that night I was at a school function. It was like a play, and we sat down, and I realized that I couldn't see the people. Like I just saw like blobs of color. I could only see right in front of me, and I couldn't like read anything anymore. So I called my mom, and she had known that I had some of the symptoms. I hadn't given her the full information. So I called her and I said, like, I can't see, I'm losing my eyesight, but I don't know what's wrong with me. And so that was the thing that sent me to the hospital, my eyesight. And it wasn't that I couldn't see anything. It was just literally like blurs of color. Like, when you like press on your eyes and then open them and you see blurry for a minute sometimes. That was my experience. And I begged her not to take me to the hospital. I said, like, I think I'm just like exhausted and like I'm on all these medications. I just need to go home and sleep. So I convinced her to take me home. And we get home, and I just like went to bed, and like 15 minutes later she comes in and she's like, no, we're going to the hospital. And thank God, because when I got to the hospital, well, first, again, I explained my symptoms the way that I thought they were. So the biggest thing I said, I'm here because I can't see. And they're like, what other symptoms have you had? And I was like, well, I've been dizzy. I didn't think the thirst, I didn't think any of that was even important. So I didn't tell them. And they like drew blood, and here at the emergency room, they like whisked me away to do all these brain scans, because they thought maybe I had something in my brain.
Yeah.
Right. So I was whisked away, and like 3 hours later, I'm back in the emergency room, and a nurse comes to me and she has my chart and she says, why didn't you tell us you were diabetic? And I was like,
because I'm not.
I was like, I'm not diabetic. And she's like, your sugar's at 709.
So,
and I was like, I don't know what that means.
Because this will come up when I share my story too. What's a normal range in the US? Because it's different than here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So in the US, a normal person would be between 70 to 115, 120.
Okay.
So, and I think you guys use like what I use as like my A1C, right? Like the numbers.
Which makes more sense to me. Like, why would they change this? Your country? I don't know, man. Like,
we're backwards. I agree. Yeah. So I was probably, I have no idea what that is. I don't know I can't remember my first A1C reading, but I want to say it was north of 13.
I can convert it.
Yeah. 709.
I'm curious. Convert US blood glucose to Canadian. Apparently people have tried it before.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh, okay. Conversion table. I don't think it's going to go to 700. Let's see. Because you said around 700?
Well, yeah, you have to remember, 709 is what I was diagnosed with.
I feel like our numbers were probably comparable, because this is saying, I don't know how to do the math, but like 270 would be a 15. And it looks like it goes up by, okay, so 10 is 0.6. How would I do that math?
I have no idea.
So, like if it goes from 270 to like 280 in my numbers, that would go up by 0.6.
Okay.
So wait, you said we're going to do this. You said you were at like a 710?
Yeah. 710 minus 270 divided by 10, right?
7 divided by 10, 44 times 0.6
Times 0.6.
plus 15. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We had similar numbers. It's 41.4. And mine was a 46 when I was diagnosed. So
Jesus. And I'm like, it was above 13. Like, I have no idea what I'm even talking about.
now you know.
Yeah. So
But no,
now I
your
know in the
A1C could have
40s.
been, right? Because like your A1C might have averaged
Right. Because it's the
out.
last 3 months. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now we know.
So that's and I think there's been a lot of work done around here so that diagnoses in the emergency room aren't as shocking, because my mom was next to me and I was like, what is she talking about, mom? Like, and I was so delirious at this point.
Oh, for sure.
And as soon as I found that, as that nurse came by and she realized what she had done, she like, I had like 5 doctors in my room, because she, it wasn't her fault. She kind of blurted out and gave me this devastating news in this manner that was, not the best bedside manner. And I was instantly put on an insulin drip, and I ended up being hospitalized for 5 days. Got out of the ICU though after my sugar went below like 350, they finally transferred me over to a regular room, and they wouldn't let me leave until I went below like 250. So you said like 270 was 15.
Yeah.
So probably the equivalent of that. It would have had to be like below 13 or something like that for them to let me
that was about for
go
me,
home.
like an 11, 12. They were like, okay, this is reasonable. You can go on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So same. And here, the worst part about all this was that the way that they taught me, and they had like old VHS videos, and they made me watch like 3 30-minute videos.
Too like, but I'll tell you a bit. I couldn't see the video, so yeah.
Yeah. So I did. By the time I left, my eyesight was much better. But and this is how I tested it, because they put a little like board in front of you and they write down the name of the nurse. And for the first 2 days, I just couldn't see it. And then like the fourth day, I was like, I can read it if I really squint. And then the 5th day was blurry, but I could read it. So that's how I knew I was getting much better. But the videos were just so ridiculous, and I didn't know what to do. It is hard to send a diabetic home and just say like start using insulin. So I was just giving myself units. The doctor said like give yourself 8 to 10 units for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which is a ton.
You're just like doing this nonstop, because that happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I will, first of all, and I was pricking my fingers like 50 times a day, and I was just drinking juice all the time.
Because you kept going low.
I kept going low because for me, even now, but then I was like at the honeymoon period or whatever it's called. So I needed much less insulin. And like, I think at the time was doing like 1 unit for 15 carbs. So imagine 8 to 10 units for breakfast. Like, who can eat that much?
No, very, very similar on my end too. And I think that's why for me, they quickly realized that like, and I told them, I was like, I need to be able to count this. I don't eat the same things all the time. I don't eat on a schedule. Like, I am a student working full time. Like, this is not for me. And for some people, I think that like, because they had me doing 6 units 3 times a day to try to make it easy. It's like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But my breakfast wouldn't be enough for that. And then because also I of course was in panic mode of like, I can't eat carbs anymore. So I'd be like eating like all protein and like vegetables.
Exactly.
And they'd be like, take all this insulin. And then I was living in Toronto. So I was like, and I didn't take transit because it's flat. So I was like walking an hour, and I just like, my legs would start to give out. And very quickly they were like, okay, that's not going to work. And I was like, yeah, no shit. So then we had to switch it. Now I feel like I'm the same again, because I told you I got a pump like 3 days ago.
Yeah.
But it feels the same of like, I don't know how to do this anymore. Like, it's all, and I know it'll get easier soon because I've been doing this stuff in my head. The pump is just to make my life easier.
Which one do you have?
Oh, you too? Okay, that's so funny. I love
I'm
it.
actually, I'm going high. Let me bolus if needed.
This one, what is it? I went through Medtronic.
Okay, I have the T. So I actually, yeah, okay. I got the T-Slim and I don't like the pump. So I wear a glucose monitor. I do love that. And I don't think I'll ever give that up. I've been wearing one for like 6 years now. And the only time I stopped was like when I was out of supplies. But I don't love wearing a pump. I feel like it's too machiny and it's hard to wear certain clothes with it. You know, like I wear a lot of dresses at work, things like that. But the T-Slim has the Smart IQ. So my biggest issue currently, and probably for the last, I don't know, 5 to 7 years, is that I go at high or low at night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to keep a schedule. Like I have really tried hard to not eat after like 7 or 8 p.m.
I do
But
that though. I literally wake up at 6 a.m. starving. Like, and I can't get enough sleep if it's a weekend. So
yeah.
it's a problem. Like, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I don't know why like some things just take so long to process, but like I don't go to bed, I'll have dinner, let's say at 8, I don't go to bed until midnight. My sugar's fine. And then at 3 a.m. it's at 300, which again, I go to
It sounds
bed
like
at
I'm
100.
like a 15, 16, and I had
Yeah.
that the other morning. So I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one is smart technology that actually gives you insulin if that's happening, which is nice because
This
I've been
can do
waking
that.
up right. That one does that too?
It can. I'm apprehensive. Mostly because, so I guess it might sound really stupid, but I'm like, I don't trust it because so far the numbers we put into it aren't working. And I've overrided the machine and my blood sugar has been perfect. And so I think like maybe in time I'll use that option, but I don't want to do it before we have figured out like what my numbers are and all of that stuff. Like I don't want to rush to that option. And I feel
Yeah.
like the nurse is kind of pushing to do it sooner than later. But it's similar with like me going on a pump in the first place. I really disliked that my endo was using the pump as, to me it felt like an out because I would do the most detailed logs you have ever seen. Like I am diligent. Because my team in Toronto was so good. They'd sit with me for like 3 hours and crunch the numbers and do the thing. And like they could figure out where I had counted wrong, where I needed an adjustment at like a certain hour of the day. They would do all of that. Out here, people have been they've been shit. They do nothing. And it's really frustrating because I end up doing more of the math than they do. So I've been managing pretty much without support for the last 5 years. And so when my endo said that, I was like, okay, great. If you can show me the value of a pump, yes. But if you're putting this as like a band-aid solution to stuff you don't want to actually look at, like what's that solving? And
Yeah.
so I held off. And I finally got one because my nurse framed it the opposite way. And I think it's just like when we were talking about like the different types of diabetes, like there's many reasons to go on a pump. And like one, and it's not a bad reason, like similar, like none of them are bad. It's just your situation. Like one is if you are not someone who can do the counting and do the math and manage those things, it could make it better for you.
Mm-hmm.
On my end of the spectrum, it was more of you're literally managing like an extended bolus or whatever you want to call it, like in your head. And I set timers every 2 hours for 6 hours when I know I've eaten a certain food and I need to like do increments of insulin. And it's like, you don't have to do that. Like that doesn't need to be your whole life. And so finally I was like, oh, please just let my life be easy. And so I decided to get one. And I have the CGM, but we're doing that in 2 weeks. We're doing like parts at a time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And being a type 1 is it's like being your own nurse full time. So same, and it's just like sometimes I'll be at work and I meant to do one in 2 hours, but then I'm like in a weird situation and I don't know, not, like not that anybody would mind me stepping out and giving myself insulin, but sometimes it just gets in the way of like your real full-time job in your life. So I do think it's easier, but like I said, I don't love having one. I don't love wearing one. So that's mostly been my issue. And then it does actually, the CGM weirdly, and I think it's because it doesn't push insulin through, it doesn't bother me. And the one I have, you keep on for 10 days and it never hurts. When I take it off, there's a little dot and it's gone within, a few days. The pump leaves a lot more scarring for me and it starts hurting. And I think that's because it's like actually pushing medicine through, but I can only wear it for 2 days. I can't even keep it on for 3.
Yeah, I noticed it started to be a bit irritated at 2 days, but it's also the first time I've worn it. And I have a problem sometimes with adhesive. So I'm going to just have to see how that goes. But I also do an injection 5 days a week for MS, and it leaves marks and it is painful. And I've already lost injection sites. So another part of my motivation of going on the pump was I'm lessening my sporadic pin pokes every day. And so it'll be, I think, easier long term when I'm dealing with
Yeah.
all of these needles. But now my dilemma, not that it's I mean, to me, it's a dilemma because like clearly I have tattoos and they're like, you can't put the pump on a tattoo because it's considered scarring, which I thought was like BS because it's like the tiniest needle ever. But I was planning to be like covered. And so now I'm like, do I have to rethink that? Like, I don't know. So I might just post in some of the groups and ask people because I'm sure people have like full body tattoos and have a pump and it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, really.
And I think, in a lot of these things, and this saying this with a grain of salt, right? But I ask the diabetes community a lot because the things that are approved aren't always the only things that work. So like the CGM, I think is only technically approved for your stomach and maybe now your arms. And I was only wearing it in my stomach and my stomach was starting to feel like it had like some scar tissue forming because I wore the pump and, the CGM. And my stomach is more sensitive than my arms or legs. And I started seeing pictures of other people having it everywhere, but I had read the rules and it said only put it on your stomach at the time where I got it. And so I said, you know what, let me just give it a try and see if it works. And so I asked other people and they're like, yeah, it's totally accurate on your leg. Like just test your finger if you really don't think it is. So I do turn to them a lot to see what actually works. And I found that some sites don't work for me and that's okay. But, my arms and legs do. So that's good.
Yeah, yeah, and it is. It's very much trial and error. Like that same endo who I did not like that man. I would ask him questions like, I noticed on weekends my blood sugar was like, I was a lot more insulin sensitive. And I asked him, I was like, do you think it's because my cortisol is lower? Because cortisol is like pro-inflammatory and it inhibits the metabolism of insulin and like all that stuff. That's probably not the right sciencey terms, but like, whatever. And he was like, oh, just adjust your insulin. And I was like, that's not what I asked you. Like, I want to know why before I go changing this thing that I'm putting in my body. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And now I have a doctor. He's technically an internal medicine specialist and like, he's not the greatest. But what I do appreciate is that he very quickly was like, well, no, like I know the science, but you live with this every day. So why would I doubt your experience? And I was like, thank you. Like, I feel more doctors need to operate that way, even if, they take that and then they're like, okay, but we really need to look at it from this angle due to this reason. Sure. But like, don't discount my experience because you went to school. Cause like I'm living with this.
Yeah.
But okay, so your diagnosis story, because I wanted to kind of relate because it actually is like so similar to what I went through in like a lot of ways. Because I had the same types of things happening. Like I was noticing I was super exhausted and it got to the point where I'd be like trying to study at my desk and I'd wake up like with my face on the desk and I'd probably only wake up because I had to pee. And then I'd go to try to pee and I'd like barely have to pee. And it was just that ongoing thing. And I was like losing weight. I was drinking like gallons of chocolate milk. I don't know why, but that's like what I was craving. Like, and not really eating because I didn't really feel hungry. I was just drinking like anything I could. Also because my mouth was so dry that I was working at Starbucks at the time and like it would get stuck trying to talk to customers. Like just so uncomfortable. And it got to so I had a similar thing where I went to the doctor because I noticed some of these symptoms. But me being like all knowing, I was like, I did just start a new iron supplement. Could that be doing this? Like so similar, I swear to God. And she kind of like looked at a couple things and was like, yeah, it could like go see how it goes. Like come back in a couple weeks if you need to, like whatever. So I went home and it just got worse. And it got to the point that like my legs were cramping and felt like they were giving out. And like I was sleeping 24/7. I couldn't retain, it was like exam season. I couldn't retain any information. Like nothing was making sense. And so I went back and I told the other doctor who was actually the one who diagnosed me with diabetes and with MS. Like she was my like little angel. I told her what had been going on and she basically was like, go pee in this cup. And I was like, okay. So I did. And she didn't even have to do any tests. She looked at it and she's like, you're going to the hospital right now. And it was a block away. The hospital was a block away. And she was like, do you have money for a cab? And I was like, no, like I can walk there. It's fine. Because, student life. And she said,
Yeah.
like, you can't walk by yourself right now. Like, let me check. And they used to have cab vouchers, I guess, and they didn't anymore. So she actually gave me cash to get me to the hospital so I could take a cab to the hospital. I went in, and they had me like in the hospital bed, checking my sugars, whatever. So I was at a 46, like I said, and I had a similar thing though happen where my mom had actually asked me, she's like, do you think you're diabetic? And a friend of mine who was like, I really don't think you are. Cause like, I guess cause my symptoms were so different and she had been diagnosed younger. So it was hard to relate that way. Right. Like if you and I had talked, we would have been like, oh, something's going on. But I remember the funny thing to me was I was in the hospital bed. I like got my IV hooked up finally. And I got like 3 bags of saline to just like start to bring things down. I think before they did an insulin drip, or maybe they did both. And my boss called me and was, I think, calling to see if I could come into work. And I was like, oh, I'm actually at the hospital. And he's like, oh, is everything okay? Like are you visiting someone? I was like, no, I'm in the hospital. I'll keep you posted how this goes. And he's like, oh, okay. And so I was there 3 days and they brought my sugar like similarly down to like an 11 or 12, I think, before they let me leave. I remember being really frustrated because at a certain point I went down to like the cafeteria and I went to Second Cup and got like a tea latte and I got like sugar-free syrup and like all that stuff and whatever. And they like got mad at me for doing that. Yet they're feeding me like sandwiches with bread.
Yes.
Like, I told you I don't eat gluten and you're giving me this, yet you're saying this is a problem. Like, how does that make any sense? But anyway, and it was while they were bringing my sugars down, that's when my vision started to go. So it had been okay. I think probably because maybe my blood sugar went up like really slowly or something. And so my body just like adjusted. But then the shock of bringing it down, they said it was like shock to my retina. And yeah, it was very similar. It was like gradually everything went blurry. I could only see very vague shapes. And like not good. Like I probably shouldn't have been walking down the street by myself because it got to that point, right?
Yeah.
And that lasted a bit over a month. So the first like 2 to 3 months was the more serious, and like I gradually could start to see a bit more. And like my parents thankfully had a trip planned already, so they came out like a week or 2 after that, and they helped me with like groceries and like whatever. And I was wearing like I didn't have glasses at the time. I was wearing like the pharmacy glasses, but like the highest strength ones. And if I was trying to like do work, I'd put on like 2 pairs to like barely see anything. And like my nurse was messaging me in like 72 size font, like things like that. But it took about a month for it to get back to like normal-ish. And then I went back to work. But like, yeah, very similar. Like a lot of the things you mentioned like are actually the same things that I experienced. So
yeah, a lot of the symptoms. And so did you also not have anybody from your family that was type 1?
Not that I knew of, no. I think I feel like there's someone who has been mentioned like back in my family, but they're not even like directly related to me. And now similarly, I have like a great uncle who's married into the family and he's type 1, but no one directly. Oh, but now that you mention that, my cousin was diagnosed within a week of when I was diagnosed.
Wow.
Yeah, like super weird. So now we're both type 1, but like no one prior to that for either of us. It just happened at like the same time. He's younger than me, but yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Because I think that makes a big difference. Now anybody in your family that has those symptoms would get checked out. And I know a friend I have that's type 1, her dad is type 1. So she was saying like, oh, I've been really thirsty. And my mom used to make me do this to my little sister all the time. If my little sister had too many headaches, was too thirsty, like she'd get a fingerprint prick like once every 2 months just to make sure. Yeah. So my friend was diagnosed at like her kitchen table. Her dad was like, wait, give me your finger. And he's like, yeah, your sugar's like at 200. Let's go to doctor, you're type 1.
Wow, that is so funny.
It's such a different diagnosis story than those of us that I think, it's really 2 ways. If you have somebody in the family you usually know it's coming. And so you get diagnosed when your sugar is slightly elevated. The rest of us like kind of crash into the emergency room.
700 falling over. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah. But you know what, what you said about the food, same thing here. So here they have just like the regular cafeteria food that they give, hospital food that they give you. And they had told me, I knew nothing. So I was just learning, like, but obviously, straight sugar is probably bad for me.
Yeah.
And there was this one nurse that he actually wasn't assigned to me, but he had come back to check on me because he was there when I got diagnosed. And I think he just like felt my emotions.
Yeah.
And when I finally got a room, and they were giving me food, he came over and he said, hey, if I were you, don't drink the juice or the milk. But they were giving me juice and milk. And my sugar at that time was still at like 400. It was coming, like, why are you giving me this? And he's the one that told me, don't eat that. Like I would just stick to like the sandwich that they give you, and that's okay. And now that I think back, I'm like, God, that probably saved me a couple extra days in the hospital, but nobody else told me. It was just like him not even being my nurse anymore, passing by and giving me some friendly advice. Yeah.
No, you had your little angel too. It's amazing. And like, I think with any of this, like these diagnoses, at least for me, I remember those people, like the ones that came along and helped. And like, I had one friend who she came to the hospital right away. Like I messaged her as soon as it happened, and she had like an hour commute because she lived outside of downtown. And she came and she stayed with me the whole day, and she was back the next day and like helping me go grocery shopping. And like, I remember the things people did like that. Cause like, I honestly don't know how I would have done it by myself. Like I had moments by myself, but like my roommate came and picked me up to walk me home and like all those things. And like, similarly now, I think the big thing that I try to remember with all of these things, and like, I mean, anything in our lives, but like for me, like the health stuff, like the sobriety stuff, like whatever it is like the connections like this that happen, like this gives it meaning. And like, it doesn't make it like better in the sense that like, well, yeah, I'd like to just not have this happen in my life. Like I would never want it, but I can be grateful for the connections and the opportunity to like share with someone else who gets it or who needs that help.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. And yeah, you just like build a different community of people that, I mean, even like you and I wouldn't have connected, if it wasn't because we like both put a comment in a group. It's like, hey, you're type 1, I'm type 1.
That's awesome. Like, yeah.
And it's so hard to, I actually make friends with random type 1s out here because you see us wearing a CGM usually. And this is actually a random story, but I live so New York City, each floor has 10 apartments, and it's 5 on each like corner. And I had been living here for almost a year. And one day I get in the elevator and my neighbor from across the way, she's like, I'm so sorry to pry, but are you a type 1 diabetic? And I was like, well, that's specific because nobody ever asked if I'm type 1. And I said, yeah. And she's like, my son saw you wearing the CGM on your arm and he's type 1 also. And, I had always said hi to them. I knew who her son was, but now it's nice to have somebody there. So like he had an issue with his CGM. They like weren't sending it in time and I had extra. So I gave her my extra. When all this lockdown started, I live on my own. So she texted me and said, do you need anything? Do you have insulin? Yeah. And just because we both have this same thing, now we're more connected and it's made us closer. So it's nice because I know that if I were ever to like need something, my family's all far, but the people that know about this would probably be there right away for me, which is great.
No, I think that's beautiful. And it reminds me of, I was talking to someone recently about like different contexts, but how like the things that happen in our lives they can make us feel like we're really alone, right? And like isolated. And I think a health diagnosis at a certain point, it does that because it's like, I now have this thing and it can for a moment. And for me, it did feel like no one understands this. My whole life has changed. Like it's very overwhelming and like discouraging in a sense. And then realizing that like, well, yeah, I'm an individual with this experience, but there are many other individuals. And with that, we can create this amazing supportive community. And like, it doesn't have to feel that way, I guess. And I think that's pretty incredible. And it's like, we get to heal ourselves, but like with companionship. And I always call them my Diabuddies, like for life, because it's not going away. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I was I never hid my diabetes. That was definitely not telling everybody that I was type 1 in the very beginning. And not that I am now, but I'm just much more open because I didn't meet another type 1 until I moved to New York. So that was like 5 years after my diagnosis. And like you said, I had a lot of support from my friends and family, but what you go through can feel really isolating because you really have to explain. Like, I don't have to explain to you how your vision can get blurry and then come back to normal and how you can feel thirsty and like you're like, my lips were cracked. And I'm like, I totally understand. So it's just so quick. Whereas somebody else, you really have to sit them down and tell them every single
All
thing.
the context that got you there and why. And then it's like,
Yeah.
So I don't know, like my leg was cramping today. And they're like, oh, that for that. And it's like, well, it's not that simple. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So meeting more people in the community has really made me feel like way less alone in this. And, sometimes you just want to get some advice or have a bitch fest or just like complain about
I
something.
was gonna say, sometimes you just need to vent to someone who's not necessarily gonna try to be like ask a bunch of questions to help you fix it, because they also get that like you're probably doing everything you can and sometimes it just sucks.
Yeah. Or get scared for you because I think with my family, if I tell them, my sugar's been at like high every night, I keep waking up at 15 every morning, they'd be like, should you go and I would go to the hospital if this were like month, but sometimes you have like a bad weekend and that you can solve it, but you just need to talk to someone about it, not have somebody be worried. And I think that was a big one with me because my family jumps to being really worried, which is, how we show love. But sometimes you just need somebody to say like, oh yeah, that's happened to me. And what helped, like upping my long-term insulin or blah, whatever.
Yep, totally. No, I get that too. Cause actually with like having all my health stuff and like diabetes too, it's, like I have a lot of doctor's appointments and right now most of them are virtual, but like I have a lot. And so every time my mom finds out, and like, she obviously means well, my mom is so sweet. But every time she finds out I have an appointment, she'll be asking me questions, or like I got the pump and it was like 2 hours later and it's like, well, how do you like it? And I don't think she meant it with that tone. But I think, I mean, maybe you understand this too. Like the same question could come from someone else, but feel a lot less emotionally charged. And
Yeah,
it feels sometimes like when people, not just my mom, but like when some people ask those kinds of questions, it feels like I am having to grieve and process, not just for myself, but also for them. And it can feel sometimes like all the effort I put in is being overlooked because of the not as great outcome that has happened. And like, this is already a lot to carry. Like that is not, I can't handle that, like I need to be able to do what you're doing and be like, oh shit, I woke up at 1 a.m. and I was a 17, like, but like not hold on to that, because if I do, like, I won't be able to move forward to the next day and it's gonna happen. So
yeah.
I need to figure out like what that balance is and have the people in my life like respect that boundary of letting me deal with my own health stuff, and I'll share as I feel capable.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've had to teach people. In the very beginning of my diagnosis, my parents would call me to say like, good morning. They'd be like, good morning, what's your sugar at? So every conversation started with, how's my sugar? And when I was first diagnosed, I didn't know any better. So I would tell them. And even when it was like 180, which is, I don't know, probably like a 9 or 10 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
180 is high for me, but not scary. They'd be like,
yep.
oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, that's like, I wouldn't be worried about that. Like, even if I wake up like an 11 or 12, it's maybe not ideal, but like my endo even said, he's like, long term, that is going to have minimal impact on your A1C. When I'm at like a 14 to 17 or higher, that's when I start to feel it and it'll impact my day.
Same. But I think, other people knowing like the norm is 100, so they would freak out. So after like, I don't know, a month of that, I told them, you're not allowed to ask me. I will tell you. I promise to come to you if there's something bad to share or something good or something worrisome. But we can't start all of our conversations like, oh, what are you doing today? But also, what number are you at? It was too much for me to handle because then I felt all this pressure
Mhm.
and like not for me to be okay for myself, but to be okay for others. And like just like you said, I think it's the same sentiment. It's already a lot on me. It can't be a lot on me and you, but all be on me. So
Mhm.
now my family is very good about it now, but it took time.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it does. And it's that balance. And I think, I mean, boundaries with family can be tricky to begin with. And like, they just want the best for you. And it's like, I think when you have health stuff like this, it becomes part of that rearticulating yourself as an adult in your relationship with respect to your parents, right? It's like this is another one of those things. It's like this is actually mine, and like I'll invite you in as I need to because I know you're here for me, but like this is mine to deal with day to day.
Yeah.
Mhm. No, I totally get it. I really appreciate you sharing all of this. Like, I wasn't expecting us to relate on so many of the details because that doesn't always happen, right? So it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar stories, and even with age and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. It's funny because I, I type one can be so different in how it comes through and like what it is that kind of led you to be diagnosed. So
Here we
a
are.
lot of similarities. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing everything. Because I know it's as much as it's part of our day-to-day life, like we were just kind of alluding to in that the final parts of this conversation, like it is vulnerable and it can be a lot to open up about when we're dealing with it. So just like thank you for showing up for that and being open and available for the conversation.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your side too.
Of course. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Coffee Time. Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if today's show resonated, I invite you to drop into the comment section and share whatever personal introspection came up for you today. Anything you can do to help make the show more accessible is super duper appreciated. Until next time, I am your host and coffee drinking companion, Natalie, wishing you a beautifully caffeinated day.